In today's tutorial, we are going to make a sculptural and exotic polymer clay pendant using beautiful techniques such as marble translucent clay, artistic image transfer, and bold 3D elements. If you like polymer clay pieces with depth, texture, and movement, you are going to love this tutorial.
Hi, I'm Mihaela from Learn Polymer Clay, and let's dive in.
I'm going to use parchment paper to protect my working table and gloves to protect my hands because we are going to use alcohol inks and it's going to be messy. I've prepared some translucent polymer clay that I have previously conditioned, of course, and I'm going to use inks to color 3 balls of translucent polymer clay, and I'm going to use teal alcohol ink for the first ball of for the first piece of translucent polymer clay, and in fact I'm applying a couple of drops of ink on top of the polymer clay, and then I'm coloring the exterior part of the polymer clay, and then I am going to gently knead the clay and tear the polymer clay off and reassemble it together and marble the clay. And I'm going to color this piece of polymer clay, but I'm not going to insist on mixing the clay until I get of one color, one subtle translucent color. I want to end up with some marbled clay, and I thought this would get me an interesting effect for the finished pendant. So I'm coloring the clay and I'm mixing the clay, and in fact I'm marbling the clay. And I'm going to do the same thing with some Caribbean blue alcohol ink. And for the third piece of translucent clay, I'm going to use some lime green. And so I'm just putting 3-4 drops of alcohol ink on top of the clay. Do not put too much ink because you will end up with brittle polymer clay. And I'm waiting just a little bit for the ink to evaporate, and then I'm going to mix the alcohol ink inside the polymer clay, and I'm tearing up the clay and I'm mixing it. I'm tearing it up and again mixing it until I end up with an interesting looking piece of marbled translucent clay. And so I did this with teal alcohol ink, with Caribbean blue alcohol ink, and green lime green alcohol ink. Then I'm going to roll each marble piece into a thin snake of polymer clay. And then I'm going to put together the 3 snakes, and I'm going to twist them together and marble the clay and mix the clay. And then I am going to roll another larger log and twist it again to end up with an interesting marbled, but this time colored look. This time marbled in several colors. And because I wanted this piece to have an interesting look, I decided to add tiny bits of white polymer clay in some areas, and then again I twisted and marbled the clay. I added some white clay for more interest, and then I used the roller to roll the piece on all sides, and then I'm just going to use the rigid blade and cut the shape that I want for the pendant. So I cut on the sides and in the upper and the bottom part of the pendant. it still has an organic shape, and you'll have to um, keep these trimmed clay pieces because we are going to use them at a later stage of the process. We've baked the piece for 45 minutes in the preheated oven, and I tented the piece with an aluminum disposable pan to started by preparing the image that I intend to use. And this painting is called The Great Wave, and you'll find a link in the description where you can find this image, where you can download this image from rawpixel.com. And so I downloaded the image and then I imported it into Canva. I resized it to fit the dimensions that I want for my project, and then I printed the image on a laser printer. I've also prepared some white polymer clay that I passed through the setting number 8 of my past machine, and then I applied some rubbing alcohol on top of the polymer clay, and I've placed the image facing downwards. I started to gently tap with my fingers on top of the clay and of course on top of the image, and then I've gently rubbed the image into the polymer clay, and you'll have to take the time with this step of the process in order to end up with a beautiful image transfer that will result eventually in beautiful polymer clay pieces. And so I continue to rub the image into the polymer clay, and then I've applied a little bit more liquid, and because I have because I have rubbing alcohol handy, I've applied a little bit more rubbing alcohol, and I continued to remove the paper fibers, and you'll notice that in some areas I managed to get large portions of the paper fibers, and you'll just have to take the time and remove all the paper fibers, and you might wanna leave the image transfer to the side for 1-2 minutes and then look again and check if you have even more paper fibers on top of the clay, and you can use water and gently remove them. And if I'm lucky, I manage to take off larger pieces of paper in some cases. If not, I will just take the time and continue removing the paper fibers, adding more liquid if necessary. I'm quite happy with the image transfer, and so we are ready to go to the next step of the process. And so this is the baked polymer clay base, and because we are going to attach raw clay to baked polymer clay, you'll have to use liquid clay to do so. So I'm preparing a little bit of liquid clay and a brush, and I'm applying liquid clay on the areas that I want to decorate with the image transfer. Of course, I'm applying a very thin coat of liquid clay. Do not put too much, you don't need a lot of it. And I'm applying on the front, on the back, and on the sides because initially I just wrapped the image transfer that I previously trimmed, and I just wrapped the image transfer piece on top of the pendant, all around the pendant. And you have to do this carefully and take your time. And initially I placed it on top of the clay, and then I gently pressed it into the base. You'll have to remove any air bubbles and use a very gentle touch. You don't want to distort the image transfer, of course. And you will have to do your best to avoid pressing on the image transfer, because anytime you touch the image transfer with your hands, some of the ink of the transfer will transfer further to your hands, and the image will become less clear. So I'm pressing the image transfer into the clay, but I'm doing so with a very gentle touch, and I'm bringing back the scrap clay that we trimmed off when making the base pendant, and I've put them on the pasta machine through the setting number 3, because I want to have a consistent width for these pieces. And I'm going to use a small triangle cutter and cut out triangle elements. And I'm going to cut a lot of such triangle elements because I want to decorate the front of the piece and the sides as well. And on the front I intend to make 2 parallel rows of such decorations. So I have also prepared a round ball tool. Again, we are using liquid polymer clay to put together raw polymer clay and baked polymer clay. And so I've applied a little bit of liquid clay on the areas where I want to attach the 3D elements. And initially I've put the pieces on top of the clay and use the round ball tool to press them into the clay. But then I've changed my mind and I decided that I wanted to have a sculptural look, and I've pressed one corner of the triangle element while the other part is sticking upwards. And I'm going to make 2 rows with such triangle elements partially pressed into the base. And in fact I'm going to add some triangle elements on top of the image transfer as well, but because the image transfer clay is still raw, I don't really need to put liquid clay on top. And I think I like these kind of elements more, so I decided to take off the initial 2 elements that I placed on the piece and clean the area. And I'm going to cut more such elements, and I'm going to decorate the margins, the sides of the pendant with such elements, but this time I'm going to make only 1 row because there is not enough space to make more than 1 row. If you don't have a triangle cutter, you can use your craft knife and cut out triangle elements. And again, I'm using liquid clay to adhere these sculptural triangle elements to the baked base. And I'm going to use the round ball tool and do the exact same thing and press one corner of the triangle into the base while the other parts of the triangle are kind of sticking out. And in the same time, you'll notice that I'm partially overlapping these triangle pieces. And I decided that I did not like the look of the pendant all covered up with the image transfer, so I decided to use the rigid blade and trim off the image transfer on the sides because I wanted to have that beautiful marbled, translucent marbled look visible on the sides of the pendant, and I thought this would bring more cohesion to the piece between the upper part and the bottom part. And I really like these wavy elements, and I thought they would complement beautifully the idea of the image transfer, which represents a big wave. And while working on the piece, and because of the fact that I continued working on the piece while the image transfer was not baked, I've unintentionally put my fingers on top of the image transfer and took off part of the piece. So I decided to use the craft knife and cut out some openings on the front of the piece, which were not intended in the beginning of the project, but then I thought they were even more interesting, and they added more interest to the piece. So I like this piece with these cutout areas even more, but I did not have them in mind when I started the project. And this is the beauty of polymer clay. You'll have to stay flexible and adapt. And then I put the pendant on top of a metallic cutter, and I've baked the piece again for 45 minutes in the preheated oven. And I tinted the piece with an aluminum disposable pan to protect it from direct heat. And then I decided to attach an eye screw pin to be able to wear this pendant. And I'm just going to use a hand drilling tool and poke a hole. Then I started to screw in the screw eye pin, um, just a little bit, and then I added some super glue, kind of strong glue, and I finished screwing in the eye pin into the pendant. Of course, when using image transfer to decorate your polymer clay pieces, you'll have to decide how you are going to protect the image transfer. And for this piece, I decided to use some Renaissance wax and protect the image transfer. So I've used my fingers and I've applied a little bit of Renaissance wax and I let it dry. And then I decided to ink my initials with black ink and my stamp. But if you decide to ink your piece and mark your piece, you'll have to do this before applying the Renaissance wax, and then apply Renaissance wax on top to protect these two. And this is the finished piece, and I really like how it turned out, and I hope that you like this piece too, and that you are inspired to make sculptural pieces using also image transfer to beautifully decorate your clay pieces. Thank you, and stay tuned for more inspiration for your work with polymer clay. And if you like this idea, here's what to watch next.